Hello and welcome to this lecture titled Project Success. You may have seen signs like this before. We offer three kinds of service: good, cheap, fast. You can pick any two. Good service cheap won't be fast. Good service fast won't be cheap. Fast service cheap won't be good. That's kind of humorous, but there's a deep truth there. And it's important to have realistic expectations. You're not going to get the very best price on the very best product with the very best time. That's not the way it's going to work. You should have realistic expectations. This diagram is another way of saying kind of the same thing. You can hope for good performance and a fast schedule, but those two overlap, it's going to be expensive. You know, it's like the sign says, good, fast, cheap, pick any two, and as this figure shows, all three of these at the same time are impossible. Now, this lecture we're talking about is Project Success, and that middle ground right there, good, cheap, and fast, says impossible. You'd probably like it to be your goal. That's actually the goal, that's the definition for success. And this figure of this triangle, this triple constraint, I think comes from our book here where we talk about these three things. And I know the next figure does where we have a fourth constraint. But let me talk about the three constraints first before we introduce the fourth constraint. And I talk about this because I want you to understand that those two diagrams, the one we had on the last slide, which is still there in smaller form, good, cheap, fast is impossible, and this diagram of combining our budget, being successful with our budget, successful with our schedule, and successful with our performance, that the overlap on all three of those is the definition of success. This is not self-contradictory. This is not impossible. The reason is to understand is this. The idea of cheap is not the same thing as budget. If you want good and you want fast, you can do that, but you have to budget appropriately. Your budget can't be cheap. Likewise, fast is not the same thing as on schedule. You can have high quality if you're willing to avoid the premium prices associated with short deadlines and overtime. But that means you can't rush the schedule. So being realistic with your time, budget, and results is the key to having success in these areas. Now, budget, schedule, and performance are the traditional standards. You know, this thing is on time, on budget, and meets specifications. And there's a whole litany of projects that fail on one of those three things. They're not delivered on time, it's not delivered on budget, comes way over budget, comes way over schedule, and it doesn't perform the way it's supposed to work. Those projects are clearly failures. But every project that hits those three isn't necessarily a success. So for example, suppose you're an automobile company and you're designing a brand new car. And suppose this new car design is produced on time, on budget, and to the specifications. It would be declared a success within the organization by those three metrics. But here's the deal. What if nobody buys it? Right? If nobody buys it, then it's not a success. If you're a shoe company, you come out with a brand new shoe, and the shoe is designed and made available on time, on budget, and to specifications. That's great, but if nobody buys it, how can you call that a success? So budget, schedule, and performance, or time, cost, and quality, those can't be your only measurements of success. You've got to include client acceptance as part of your definition of project success. After all, the final arbitrator of your success is not your internal stamp of approval within your organization. It's how well does the product or the service play out in the marketplace. If you're not successful in the marketplace, then it doesn't matter how much you're patting yourself on the back for being on time, on budget, and to specification. You can do the project well, but if nobody wants it, you're doing the wrong thing. And what's the reward in doing the wrong thing well? You don't want to be caught doing that. And that's what focusing on the three characteristics without bringing into place the importance of the fourth constraint will result with. It's critical that client acceptance, marketplace acceptance, is a constraint in your measurement of success. Okay, so this idea of adding to the big three is taken a step further by a researcher named Atkinson. And he says, okay, well, the iron triangle, right, cost, quality, time, we can look at those, and there's trade-offs between those. If I want to, spend a little more money, I can get it delivered a little faster, I can have a little better product, and so on. But I've got to go way beyond just those internal measures. I've also got to look at treat those only as a tiny part of the whole picture. And there we see this table from your reading. Atkinson, he explains the idea of client acceptance to be, well, who's the client, right? Well, it's all the groups affected by a project, and they should all have a say in the project's success. So you have many eyes on the project looking at it from many perspectives, because not everybody has the same goal. At Western, for example, not everybody has the same goal and need for Blackboard that I might have or that you might have. So you want to have many people's eyes on it because they're doing different things with it. They're using discussion boards. We use discussion boards in our class, for example, but somebody else might not in their class. Somebody else might be using some of the group collaboration tools that I'm not using in my class that somebody else might use in their class. So it's important to have multiple eyes on the project, and that's what this figure kind of shows us. The thinking here is that more eyes is going to be a better performance. Now the risk, as you might imagine, is that you can have the old adage, too many chefs in the kitchen. You can have too many people telling you how to do something, and that can have a negative impact. So you have to make sure that everybody understands, what's the big picture, what are we trying to do? We're trying to build a better car, we're trying to build a better sneaker, we're trying to build a better blackboard, whatever it is, and let's not let one person's opinion, as we have many people at the table, take us off track of what we're doing. But multiple eyes is a good thing, and that's kind of what Atkinson brought to this. I also want to talk about maturity models for a few minutes here. The idea that you want to get better over time. No matter what it is that you do, you should be better at it today than you were a week ago or a month ago or a year ago. Whether that's the way you, whether it's the way you sing, whether it's the way you read or write, whether it's the way you shoot a free throw if you're a basketball player, whatever it is, you should be getting better over time. An organization is the same way. And project management, one of the goals in project management is to come up with these models of tracking the organization's success over time, and the purpose of tracking it is to also improve it, find ways of getting better. As we think about maturity models, here's a diagram that kind of conveys some of that information. And at first glance that looks a little bit confusing, but it's really not. You just create what's called a spider web diagram, but you identify the metrics that you're going to be measuring, and it's the things that you measure that matters. So if it's important to you, you should be measuring it within the organization. It's only the things that you measure that matter. In this case, we're measuring project scheduling and the structure support for project management, portfolio management, are we keeping up with it, and so on. And we want to rate how well we're doing on each one of those things. In this case, it's a scale from 0 to 3. 0 on our level rating would be the lowest possible level. That's where our processes, our organizational support, it's not defined. It's ad hoc. You're making it up as you go along, each person for himself or herself. And then a 1, we might say, okay, well, we've defined our organizational goals here, but we haven't really standardized how we're going to do that. On the second level, so we're 2, which are almost at the top, 3 is our top, but if we're at 2, okay, things are becoming standardized, but 3 is our goal, and 3 is going to be who's the industry leader in this, who's cutting edge. Right? Organizations have competitive advantage. Their brand or their procedures gives them an advantage there. Volvo, anything associated with safety is a competitive advantage for Volvo because people associate that aspect with that organization. That's part of their brand, and that's something that they would be a 3 on because they're an industry leader. Dell, for the computers, they really maximized the just-in-time computer manufacturing where they didn't have parts sitting around in warehouses. They were able to reduce costs and yet still get products shipped out very quickly, and they were the leader there. They would definitely be a 3 on just-in-time computing manufacturing. So 0 is we're making it up as we go. 3 is at the high end where you're a competitive advantage in the marketplace against your competitors, whatever that is. You're doing it better than other people. And every organization is trying to move toward that direction. An ideal spider web would have 3s all the way across every measure that you're doing. You'd be the industry leader. That's not practical. I don't know any organization that does that. A company that's just starting out and hasn't done any formalization might have zeros all the way around. Their web might be there at the very, very beginning, where on everything they're doing, everybody's doing it on their own, running around like chickens with their head cut off. Every person's trying to make it up as they go. Somewhere in between there, you can do this kind of a chart. And these numbers are not absolute. This is just within the organization. We look at it, and here's what we think we're doing at. Here's where we think we're strong, and here's how strong we think we are in this. And it just gives you a snapshot so that you can kind of see where you're at and work on getting better. If you can get 10% better, if you can move your web so it's always growing out, doesn't matter where it's growing out, but it's always growing out and getting bigger over time, then you're making progress. This table, I just captured this real quick. It's got a lot of information on it. It's in your book, Table 3. But talking about maturity models are very in vogue these days. They reflect a growing interest in project management, and that maturity requires continuous improvement through measurable and repeatable objectives. Now, exactly what you're measuring and exactly how you repeat those is not standardized. And here we see 4 different maturity models with the different levels. Each of these happen to have 5 levels associated with those versus the 4 levels we had on the previous one. And again, so those are themselves, you wouldn't want to change from one metric to another metric. You'd want to pick a metric and stick with it. But the idea is that they're all trying to do the same thing. And I like this next slide because it kind of summarizes all 4 of those models from the previous slide. Can be summarized in this single triangle slide, where we just give a loose definition here. We're losing some of the information, we're losing some of the specifics, but in general terms, all of those from the previous slide, the lowest level is ad hoc, no common language, little organizational support. You're doing things on your own. Moving up through the process where things become defined, things become more structured, more data is collected and analyzed, eventually to the point that you have a very strong procedural mechanism in place on how to do things, how to support the process, how to learn from the process and evaluate on it, and ideally even to the point that you become an industry leader and have a competitive advantage because you're the best in your market space in that particular area. Okay, so we're on our summary points for this lecture here. 4 points here. The triple constraints, the iron triangle, time, cost, and performance. That really is measuring internally how we're doing the process. It's not how well the process is going to be received. The product is going to be received. So this customer client acceptance element has been added to that, a 4th constraint in our Venn diagrams. The Atkinson model takes that even further to where we're looking at getting input from all of the groups affected with a project. Maturity models are used within an organization to measure how well they're doing over time and how they compare with other firms that they're competing against in the market space. And the goal is to become a leader in one or more areas to give you a competitive advantage. And all 4 of the maturity models that we looked at in this chapter that are discussed in our book, they all focus on continuous improvement, constantly getting better, constantly collecting data, constantly analyzing, and making progress over time.